Zoya Khan, 29 years old, walks through the marble-lined corridors of a luxury real estate investment firm in New York City. Her heels are quiet, her presence even quieter. She's not someone who draws attention, by design. With her dark hair tied neatly, a pair of modest earrings, and a calm, observant gaze, she's labeled by most as just the administration. To them, she schedules calls, orders lunch, manages emails, and ensures the boardroom is always stocked with water bottles and working pens. But behind that unassuming exterior lies a woman with a sharp financial mind and a network that extends far beyond office walls. Her job title says executive admin, but what she actually does would make half the firm sweat if they knew. She personally liaises with offshore investors, ensures high-level financial transactions pass legal review, and facilitates backdoor negotiations between rival developers. She's the person who makes sure the deals happen, not the ones who take credit for them. Still, she stays silent. Zoya has always believed that true power is quiet. While others perform, she watches. While others speak, she listens. Her boss, the CEO, knows exactly how valuable she is. So does the CFO. But no one talks about it, because Zoya doesn't want them to. One morning, as she's reviewing investor summaries, a sleek white envelope lands on her desk. It's from Diana, the glamorous, loud, attention-seeking colleague who thrives on being seen. Diana is getting engaged to Julian Wright, a wealthy venture capitalist whose name floats through tech circles. The envelope is an invitation to their engagement party, set to be held on a rooftop in Manhattan with views of the skyline and guest lists filled with influencers, real estate barons, and important people. Zoya reads the invitation twice, her expression unreadable. The two women have worked together for years, but Diana has always thrown thinly veiled jabs at Zoya's role. "You're the one who makes sure the coffee is hot for billionaires, right?" she once said with a smirk in front of interns. The invite now seems less like a warm gesture and more like a calculated move, a subtle attempt to show off her social world while placing Zoya at the bottom of it. Zoya places the envelope in her drawer, closes it slowly, and goes back to typing. She doesn't RSVP. Not yet. She has no intention of playing Diana's game. But if she goes, it will be on her own terms. Quietly, powerfully, and perhaps, for the first time, visibly. The rooftop sparkled with string lights draped above sleek white tents. A live jazz trio played near the bar, and champagne glasses clinked over quiet murmurs of business deals and designer gossip. It was the kind of gathering where last names mattered more than first impressions. From the 30-second elevator ride to the top of the Manhattan high-rise, the atmosphere was curated to scream status. Zoya stepped onto the rooftop in a black dress that skimmed just past her knees. It was elegant, timeless, and not designer. Her hair was pinned back neatly, and she carried no purse, just a discreet card holder tucked into her coat. While other women floated in diamonds and silk, Zoya walked with the stillness of someone who didn't need to perform. Eyes brushed over her but quickly moved on. No cameras turned. No influencers rushed over. She preferred it that way. Diana spotted her from across the deck and made her way over, glass in hand, smile too wide. "You came," she said brightly, wrapping one arm around Zoya's shoulder like they were old friends. Zoya returned the gesture with a soft, knowing smile. "Oh everyone, this is Zoya," Diana said, turning to the group of men and women in designer suits and stilettos. "She's our admin girl. She keeps our emails from crashing and our calendars from imploding." The group laughed lightly, the kind of laugh reserved for jokes that weren't funny but were socially expected. Zoya simply nodded and replied, "Nice to meet you all." She didn't flinch. Years of experience had taught her how to absorb small slights without reacting. One woman leaned in and asked, "Are you the one who sends out those investor updates? I've seen your name." "Yes," Zoya replied, "among other things." But the moment was interrupted when Julian Wright approached the group. Diana immediately brightened. Julian, tall and confident with the casual arrogance of someone born rich, slid his arm around Diana's waist and said, "So this is the famous Zoya." "She's basically our office Google," Diana said with a laugh, sipping her drink. Julian turned to Zoya. "So, What is it you actually do? His tone wasn't cruel, just dismissive, like someone indulging a party guest before moving on to real conversations. Zoya tilted her head, the corners of her mouth lifting slightly. Her voice was calm, deliberate. "I facilitate capital," she said. There was a moment of silence. Not the kind that lingers awkwardly, but the kind that shifts the energy in a room. The music seemed to dim. A few heads turned. One older gentleman across the bar, who had been half listening, now turned fully. A young woman behind Julian blinked, confused. Diana laughed softly, trying to brush it off, but her father, standing nearby, froze mid-sip. Zoya's tone hadn't changed. Her eyes remained steady. Julian didn't respond. For the first time all evening, he had no clever retort. The clinking stopped. Conversations paused. And the party, for just a moment, revolved around the quiet woman in the black dress. Facilitate capital. Two simple words, softly spoken. But in this particular crowd, words like those were nuclear. Zoya's tone hadn't changed. Still polite, still composed. But their meaning detonated in the minds of the financially fluent. The room, which had once been filled with buzzing conversation and clinking glasses, fell eerily still. A hedge fund manager standing near the sushi bar flinched, his glass slipping just slightly in his hand before he caught it. The phrase didn't carry weight for the influencers or the Instagram husbands, but for the titans of finance, for the private equity sharks, and real estate dynasts. Those words meant one thing: power. Hidden power. A murmured conversation started in the back. Two men in tailored suits leaned into each other. Zoya Khan. Did she say Zoya Khan? The same one from Ivory Atlantic. No way. The Meridian buyout? That was her. I thought that was handled through R1 Holdings. Exactly. She was behind it. Quietly. The whispers traveled like electricity across the rooftop. Someone pulled out their phone, discreetly searching LinkedIn, only to find her profile painfully minimal. No titles, no achievements, just a single word under experience: facilitator. Another guest, older and more observant, made his way through the crowd. He stopped in front of Zoya and extended a respectful hand. "You structured the Crossgate rescue package in 2021, didn't you?" Zoya met his eyes, gave a small nod. It was a group effort. He smiled, deeply impressed. "You saved thousands of jobs. Thank you." Julian's face was now unreadable. He looked at Zoya with a kind of stunned curiosity, no longer the amused condescension from before. Diana, standing stiffly at his side, looked like she was swallowing glass. Her laughter had vanished. Her glass was still raised but untouched. She glanced toward her father, silently pleading for some grounding. But her father, Edward Lane, a real estate developer known for his aggressive portfolio, stood frozen. His wife, Margot, gripped his arm. They both knew who Zoya was now. And wise. They realized something more dangerous. Zoya was the anonymous advisor who had privately cautioned several top investors to avoid backing their latest megaproject, Nova Edge Residences, a flashy, overpriced development hanging by legal threads and zoning nightmares. That one word of warning from someone like her could ripple through boardrooms and investor calls. Margot whispered through clenched teeth, "She's the reason we've been bleeding equity." Diana blinked, stunned. "That's not possible. She's just—" "No," Edward said. "She's the one who pulled the plug on our anchor investors." And in that moment, Diana understood. The woman she had mocked, dismissed as just admin, had been sitting on top of a financial web that stretched across cities and countries. Zoya hadn't just been present. She had been pivotal. Every quiet phone call, every closed-door meeting, every time she typed away quietly in a corner of the office, she was shaping decisions that moved millions. No one laughed anymore. No one questioned her presence. If anything, they questioned their own ignorance. And the girl in the black dress? She hadn't moved. She just let the silence speak. The rooftop still hummed with low murmurs and darting glances, but Zoya stood composed, her posture graceful, her eyes scanning the skyline beyond the crowd. The silence she had caused wasn't accidental. It was a consequence of years spent building a life away from the spotlight. While others worked hard to be seen, she worked harder to be underestimated. Flashes of memory stirred beneath her calm exterior. Years ago, Zoya sat cross-legged on the floor of her parents' cramped two-bedroom apartment in Queens, translating financial documents for her father, who ran a small repair shop. Her mother, a former school teacher in Karachi, washed dishes behind her. They had come to America with little more than hope and thick accents, and Zoya had vowed silently to make their sacrifices matter. She earned a full scholarship to Columbia University, graduating at the top of her class in finance and economics. Her peers went to flashy hedge funds and venture-backed startups, but Zoya took a quiet internship at the Federal Reserve. There, she learned the delicate language of money, not just how it was made, but how it moved, how it whispered, how it controlled people without ever raising its voice. From there, she worked for boutique advisory firms under non-disclosure agreements that never allowed her to attach her name to success. She didn't mind. Her mentors called her the quiet hurricane. She earned trust, then power, then reach. By 27, she was advising on capital flows bigger than entire city budgets. She never tweeted, never networked, never bragged. When a major real estate firm offered her a consulting position, she surprised everyone by accepting a role titled executive administrator. It paid less, but gave her access to the firm's inner gears and full view of its weaknesses. Zoya had a plan to remain the invisible hand. She funneled her savings into offshore trusts, diversified quietly, and, unbeknownst to even the company's board, acquired a 12% stake through silent partners and shell investments. Legally, she was a ghost owner. Practically, she was one of the firm's most powerful players. Diana had passed her in the hallway countless times, never imagining Zoya owned more of the company than she did handbags. And now, on this rooftop, the mask was cracking. Across the patio, the CEO of the firm, Richard Langston, who had been observing the evening from near the bar, set down his glass and walked over to the stunned circle forming around Zoya. He was a man rarely flustered, but tonight, he looked proud. "Julian," Richard said, addressing Diana's fiancé, "I hear you ask Zoya what she does." Julian blinked, unsure how to respond. Richard didn't wait. "You're looking at the most critical asset our company has. No offense to your future in-laws, but without her, your entire investment portfolio would have collapsed last spring." The crowd went quiet again. Julian looked at Zoya, really looked at her, for the first time. Not as an administration, not even as a woman, but as someone who had, invisibly, shaped the very table he thought he was sitting at the head of. Richard continued, "Zoya doesn't just facilitate capital. She creates value. She doesn't ask for seats at the table. She owns the table." Diana's face was pale, her smile frozen in place like cracked porcelain. Richard smiled at Zoya. "I've never seen anyone play the long game like she does." Zoya, ever composed, simply nodded. She had never needed to be loud, not when her silence could echo louder than applause. Diana's laugh cracked the silence, brittle and offbeat. "Oh, come on. We always knew Zoya was smart," she said, waving her hand as if to sweep the moment under a rug. But the tremor in her voice betrayed her. Her smile was tight, and her eyes darted around the crowd, trying to gauge if anyone else would help her reclaim control of the narrative. No one did. The air had changed. Where there was once polite indifference toward Zoya, now there was sharp, focused interest. People weren't looking through her anymore. They were looking at her, some with curiosity, others with unease, a few with awe. Diana tried to hold on to her dominance in the group conversation, but it slipped away with each passing second. Even the body language around her shifted. Guests who had once leaned toward her were now angling themselves toward Zoya. Julian, who had only minutes earlier dismissed her with a smirk, now stood with his hands in his pockets, eyes narrowed, but not in scorn, in genuine interest. "That was impressive," he said. "You've worked on the Meridian deal? I've seen the numbers. It was surgical." Zoya gave a modest nod. It was a complex situation, but the opportunity outweighed the risk. Julian chuckled softly. I'd love to hear your thoughts on a biotech portfolio I'm developing. Maybe sometime next week." Before Zoya could answer, Diana stepped in, voice slightly too sharp. "Julian, she's busy. She probably doesn't do private consulting." Zoya met Diana's eyes briefly, then turned to Julian. "Send the prospectus. If it aligns with my time and interests, I'll take a look." Julian looked surprised and impressed. "Of course." Diana's face tightened. For the first time in their relationship, she wasn't the most powerful woman in the room. As the evening progressed, more and more guests approached Zoya. A tech CEO from Palo Alto asked if she would consider advising on a stealth project. A Saudi investor asked for a dinner meeting. Even a former U.S. Treasury advisor leaned in and said, "I've been following your strategies quietly. Respect." Zoya responded to each person with calm professionalism. No boasting, no posturing. Her power didn't come from performance. It came from precision. Every word she spoke was thoughtful, efficient. She never once brought up her stake in the company, never mentioned how many silent boards she advised behind the scenes. She didn't have to. Diana stood by the bar, drink untouched, watching it all unfold. Her laughter was gone now. So was her control. She had spent years trying to stand out. Yet here was Zoya, a woman who had deliberately chosen to blend in, commanding the attention of the most powerful people on the roof with nothing more than quiet intelligence. What stung more than anything was the realization that no one had come to her defense. Not Julian, not her parents, not even the guests who once hung off her every word. They had all shifted their focus and their allegiance. Zoya, meanwhile, simply smiled, gracious, unbothered, and entirely in control. Respect isn't claimed by force. It's owned in silence. The rooftop encounter faded into the night. But by the next morning, it was already echoing through the corners of the finance world. Discreet texts became phone calls. Phone calls became meetings. Within a week, Zoya Khan's name, once virtually invisible, was everywhere. Industry blogs ran headlines like "The Powerhouse Behind the Curtain" and "Meet Zoya Khan," the woman who shook the room with one word. LinkedIn posts speculated on her background. Former classmates came out of the woodwork, claiming to have studied beside her. People she hadn't spoken to in years suddenly wanted to reconnect over coffee. Zoya ignored most of it. Her inbox flooded with invitations to keynote conferences, to join global advisory boards, to appear on finance podcasts. Some offered honorariums in the six figures. A tech accelerator in Singapore offered her a blank check to run strategy. A billion-dollar fund in London wanted her to chair their innovation panel. She declined 90% of them. Zoya had never been interested in fame. She didn't want her name in gold letters or her face on magazine covers. Her power had always been rooted in discretion. Her silence had built empires. She saw no reason to change her method now. Back at the firm, Diana returned to work with carefully painted humility. The jokes had stopped. Her voice was softer, her makeup lighter, as if trying to appear more real. She hovered around Zoya's office one morning, cup of coffee in hand, pretending to bump into her. "Hey," she said, voice cautious. "I've been working on this mixed-use project in Long Island. I know it's not flashy, but it's solid. Think you'd be willing to, I don't know, put in a word to the partners?" Zoya looked at her for a long moment, kindly, but unshaken. "I only recommend what's worth investing in," she said gently. The message was clear. No grudges, just standards. Diana nodded slowly, trying not to look embarrassed. She left without pushing further. 2 weeks later, Zoya submitted her resignation. No fanfare, no goodbye email. Just a sealed envelope left on Richard Langston's desk and a silent walk out of the building that had once overlooked her. But she didn't disappear. 3 weeks later, at a surprise internal board meeting, the truth came out. A coalition of anonymous investors had quietly bought controlling shares in the firm. And their newly appointed board representative, Zoya Khan. She walked into the room in a tailored navy suit, calm as ever. This time, no one underestimated her. Richard Langston greeted her at the table. "Welcome back," he said with a knowing smile. Zoya nodded. "Let's get to work." Gasps rippled down the boardroom table. Diana, seated 2 spots away, paled once again. Her parents, no longer shielded by their name, now had to answer to the woman they once dismissed. Zoya had left the company as an employee. She returned as an owner. And just like that, the quiet girl from the admin desk rewrote the company's hierarchy without raising her voice once. The familiar lobby hadn't changed. The polished marble floors still reflected the same fluorescent glow, the elevator chimes still rang every 10 seconds, and the receptionist still smiled with practiced politeness. But everything felt different as Zoya walked through the doors that morning. This time, she didn't carry her admin badge. No office tote. No notebook. She was no longer there to take minutes. She was there to make decisions. As she passed through the hallway, heads turned. Some stood abruptly from their desks. Others nodded in stunned silence. A few whispered to each other with wide eyes. The rumor mill had been spinning since the announcement last night that a silent acquisition had changed the company's power structure, and a new board chair had been appointed. No one had guessed it would be her. Zoya's heels clicked with confidence across the same floor she had once tiptoed on. She walked past her old office, a small windowless room, without a glance. She no longer belonged to that world. She belonged to the one above it. In the executive wing, Richard Langston held the door open for her. "They are ready for you," he said, voice warm with quiet admiration. Zoya stepped into the boardroom where the table stretched like a runway, lined with decision-makers, shareholders, and senior directors. Her seat was already marked, the chair at the head of the table. She took it without hesitation. As the meeting commenced, formalities were exchanged. Financials were reviewed. Zoya spoke little, but every word landed with precision. The room listened closely. No one interrupted her. Not anymore. Then came the final item on the agenda, performance reviews for upper management. The door opened, and Diana walked in. She looked sharper than usual, tailored blazer, minimalist jewelry, but her eyes betrayed her nerves. She scanned the room, then froze when her gaze landed on Zoya. Her voice came out uncertain. "I didn't know you were part of this." Zoya didn't flinch. "I'm not part of it," she replied with a small smile. "I lead it now." The silence that followed was deafening. Diana opened her mouth to speak but closed it again. There was nothing left to say. Richard reviewed her file aloud. Performance metrics, missed opportunities, lack of foresight in the Nova Edge project. Standard procedure. Nothing dramatic. Zoya didn't humiliate her. She didn't need to. The new hierarchy spoke for itself. As the review ended, Diana gathered her documents and turned to leave. But just before she stepped out, Zoya's voice cut through the air, calm and clear. "Diana." She turned, hand on the door. Zoya looked at her with steady eyes and said, "Never underestimate the quiet ones. We often the ones who hold the pen to your contract." The room froze. Diana nodded stiffly, then walked out, her heels suddenly sounding louder than Zoya's ever had. Zoya leaned back in her chair, not with pride, but with purpose. She hadn't come back for revenge. She had come back for responsibility, to rebuild, to lead, and to ensure that the next admin girl wouldn't need anyone's permission to take her rightful place at the table. Late one evening, Zoya sat by her apartment window, city lights blinking like distant thoughts. In her lap was a black leather journal, pages slightly worn at the edges. She turned to a blank sheet and uncapped her pen, exhaling as if to release the weight of everything she had carried silently for years. She wrote, "They wanted to box me as just administration. I didn't correct them. I outgrew them. I let their titles talk while I built foundations. I chose silence not because I lacked voice, but because I knew when to speak would be permanent." She paused and underlined the last word. Permanent. Her reflection in the window showed the same calm expression the world always saw. But inside, she knew everything had changed. The little girl who translated bills for her parents had grown into a woman who now advised nations and shaped corporations. She had walked through ridicule, dismissiveness, and invisibility, and never once needed to scream. She closed the journal, stood, and walked to her bookshelf. Nestled between investment strategy books and philosophy volumes was a slim folder labeled Legacy. In the months following her boardroom return, Zoya had quietly launched the Silent Seed Foundation, a mentorship and capital access program for first-generation women in finance. No branding, no photo ops, just impact. She spent weekends coaching girls from underfunded schools, reviewing pitch decks, refining ideas, and teaching them that they didn't need to shout to be heard. She didn't donate stadiums. She funded dreams. When reporters asked for quotes, she politely declined. "This isn't about me," she said. "It's about who comes after me." She had once chosen invisibility to survive. Now, she chose it to empower. Years later, a future event. The ballroom was filled with rising stars, young women in suits, fresh out of Ivy League schools or self-taught from library books. At the front stage stood a banner, Women in Finance, Honoring Legacy. Zoya, now in her 40s, took the stage for a quiet keynote. She wore no jewelry, no title on her name tag, just presence. After the talk, a nervous intern approached her, barely 20, with shy eyes. "Excuse me, are you Zoya Khan?" Zoya smiled. "I am." The girl blushed. "You're the woman my mom always talks about. She says you changed everything." Zoya paused, then smiled softly and replied, "Tell her I'm still just administration, just a little more influential now." Fade out.